This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellowwall podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 323 of the Yellowwallpod. I'm your host Stefan Butzko, and today we will preview once again the Revierderby, a ghost game as Lars Pollmann likes to say. Hello Lars, how are you doing?
Hello Stefan, I'm doing fine. I don't like saying it, but I mean that's quite literally the translation. So I don't know, is there a fixed English language term for that phenomenon? I don't think so.
No, the English language is quite limited, but yeah, also limited is our panel because Konstantin Eckner has better things to do apparently, and Matthias Zug unfortunately has an internet outage in Colorado. That's, I guess, the disadvantage when you live in the beautiful mountainscape. So Lars and I will have to preview everything from top to bottom ourselves now, which is not very nice, I will say. Anywho, we also do not have a sponsor for this episode, which is also not very well received, I have to say. But nevertheless, we will carry on, Lars. And I guess before we talk about the derby, once again, we will or shall discuss the rule change, because now it's official. Now Borussia Dortmund are, or also Schalke and the other Bundesliga teams are all allowed to make 5 substitutions. Can you quickly summarize what exactly that rule shift means? How do you think it's implemented? Good, bad?
It means quite simply that instead of 3 substitutions till the end of the season, whenever that may be, I mean, currently in Germany we are thinking of including relegation playoffs and cup final and stuff the first week of July. Until then, all teams can make 5 substitutions instead of 3. But it's not like you can make 5 single changes. You only have the 3 stoppages plus half-time, I guess, as you usually would have. So that means if you want to exercise your additional substitutions, you have to make a double or triple or quadruple or quintuple substitution, which would be very fun to see. But I think as we kind of talked about last week in the Q&A episode, I'm not sure how much this will actually change. I think I'm generally against the idea, perhaps on the basis of the better teams don't need additional advantages over smaller clubs. It's a side like Paderborn or Mainz or whoever's in the back end of the league table. I don't know that they have 16 players on a level that you would say they actually all have to play on Saturdays or during the midweeks fixtures, whereas Dortmund, especially someone like Bayern, obviously, and Leipzig and Gladbach, they have such deep squads and benches that they have or potentially at least a real advantage. So on the other hand, there's a tactical aspect that I do like, and kind of feels a bit like, I want to almost say, an Americanization in terms of you can make line changes like in ice hockey. I mean, theoretically you could bring on 3 fresh attackers at the same time and completely change the complexion of the game, or bring on 2 strong aerial presences if you're chasing a game, or if you need to head away 15 corners. So as we kind of joked last week, Lucien Favre might bring on 2 extra central defenders instead of 1 now to defend the lead late. So from that tactical perspective, it offers some intriguing possibilities, but again, I'm not sure that we are going to see too much of it. And I'm certainly quite happy with the fact that it's not going to lead to more time wasting, because that would be against the idea of the rule as well, because obviously this isn't meant to be a tactical tool in both sporting and fair play sense or whatever you want to call it, but it's actually so players have a bit more rest after not playing for 9 weeks and having to play in a much tighter schedule than most of them are used to, because obviously you have 9 or 10 games in the case of Bremen and Frankfurt, who have a game in hand. You have to play these 9 or 10 games in the span of 6 weeks, which, unless you're a regular in Europe, you're not used to that kind of rhythm as a Bundesliga player.
Yeah, and I will add that I think from a sports science perspective, it might also take a knock on players to have a break which is rather unscheduled. And, if you have this long-term cycle of, playing and then have a winter break and a summer break, then, a break at a moment where you actually not foresee it, that obviously might also have repercussions on your body. But I'm not a sports scientist, so I'm just speculating here. But we have a bonus question from @ShiftyRazzy, and he asks, will Favre use a sub before the 80th minute? Which is a very good question, Lars.
Yeah, I mean, Adam Darowski, I think we can call him a friend of the show. What's his hand? Is it @Fußballtwit?
Yes.
He actually made, a short study, if you like, on Twitter today, which is Thursday, and will have been online Thursday afternoon German time, if you want to go look for it.
I do that right now because I haven't seen it.
Yeah, maybe we can retweet it from the Yellowwallpod account. And he actually made a short study into Lucien Favre's usage of substitutions and kind of debunks some myths and theories on his lack of using them, if that makes sense. So I think this is more of a talking point which isn't really backed up by data, if you like. I think Favre is more or less in line with most other coaches in the terms of how he uses substitutions. It's just that sometimes he makes those late decisions when they don't work out, bringing on Ömer Toprak to defend the lead and then conceding the third goal against Hoffenheim or whatever it was. That kind of sticks in your memory. But I mean, he also regularly brought on Paco Alcácer last year and Erling Haaland at the start of his Dortmund career, and had all these joker goals, as we say in Germany, goals coming from subbed on players. So it's not like Favre is completely clueless when it comes to substitutions.
Yeah, he actually also made a nice overview of the games, or most games, as an unused sub this season for Borussia Dortmund, and Marvin Hitz as the second goalkeeper is obviously leading in that with 19. Behind that is Dahoud with 15, Balerdi 14, Schulz 13, Schmelzer 12, and Moray 12, Brünn-Larsen 11, Zagadou and Götze 10 times as an unused sub on the bench. So just to add a little bit of data. But before we talk any more about potential substitution patterns in potential stages of our speculative game, let's talk let's talk about the fact that both Emre Can and Axel Witsel aren't there, and if we know Axel Witsel, he is a very big fan of that particular duo in midfield.
Me and Emre, fantastic.
So, Lars, without the double pivot that helped Dortmund to quite a bit of success in recent months, how do you see Dortmund line up in probably the most crucial area of the midfield for the Revierderby?
Well, the good thing is there are a couple of options still. I mean, I think we can remember times when players of that magnitude missing would have been an absolute calamity, and I don't think that's necessarily the case now. I mean, we all assume, I think, that Favre is going to stick with his tried and tested since December or so back 3, 5-man midfield kind of deal, or 4-man if you call the two wingers strikers or whatever. So it's probably going to be Julian Brandt and either Thomas Delaney or Mahmoud Dahoud, and given the fact that it's a derby and Delaney seems to be in good spirits and health after missing what's been a really long time now. I mean, he's had a couple of injuries that have kept him out since, I want to say, November. Might have been late October, might have been early December, but it's still a very long time. I don't actually remember seeing him in this year's shirt, to be honest. So he had a quite nondescript start of the season, I would say. I think he, from a profile and also from experience and also from his fit with what Julian Brandt brings to the table in the center of midfield, might be a better option than Mahmoud Dahoud. So yeah, I think it's going to be Delaney and Brandt in the center, which is obviously exciting in terms of having Brandt there. Not necessarily exciting to have Delaney in his first game back, but then again, it's the first game back for everyone. So, I mean, does it really matter if you've played 9 weeks ago or if you've played 3 months ago? I think it probably doesn't.
Yeah, I think it does level the playing field, and as you said, from experience, we do know that Thomas Delaney tends to have rather good games against Schalke. I mean, he scored in the one derby that Dortmund won out of the last 8. And if I remember correctly, he was maybe the man of the match from a Dortmund perspective in this utterly dreadful scoreless draw earlier this season on match day 9, where I think Dortmund and Schalke were just 1 point apart. By now they are 14 points apart. So that tells you a little bit about the development of both clubs. Since they met in, I don't even know when that was, to be honest. I don't have it in front of me, but last year. So yeah, lots of things have happened, and I think Thomas Delaney should be a very astute replacement. Do you remember whether we've seen this particular combination in midfield at some point with Brandt and Delaney, maybe in a test match or something?
Stefan, are you asking me about friendlies?
Yeah.
After 9 weeks of coronavirus break, I barely remember what everybody's faces looked like 9 weeks ago.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know. It would have been just nice to maybe have a couple of observations if at hand, but since we don't, the only question mark behind Julian Brandt obviously is sometimes his defensive contribution, but I don't know how that looks like in the derby, because we can see that he is able to switch it on if he really wants to, but the question is if that's the sort of game where he does it or not. So obviously Witzel and Can aren't the only injuries. Dortmund will also have to do without Dan Axel Zagadou. How do you think that will impact the backline?
I mean, in terms of personnel, it's quite obvious that Manuel Akanji is going to get the nod at left center half. Not necessarily his best position, I would say, but I mean, for all the flack we've given him, he's still a capable defender when he's not on a completely terrible day. And he also recently became a father for the first time, so congrats are in order there, and maybe that's something that propels him to finding the form that he had shown for Dortmund until, he completely fell off the cliff kind of, start of 2019, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, this, I think, would tend a little bit like a restart for a lot of players. I think, from a sport psychological point of view, if things weren't going for you, this is probably how you would take this sort of restart. So I will hope that he finds a better way into this game. I mean, for Dortmund, the first 10 minutes are often quite important and how they find into rhythm and into the game. I don't even know if they are going to be more nervous or less nervous. I mean, it's obviously a very big game, but I don't know how a big game will feel like. And I mean, at today's press conference, Michael Zorc was asked, about how he feels about a Ghostgame, and especially a derby. And he said, yeah, well, I never had a derby like that, so I can only tell you after the game. And I guess that's the one correct answer, because we really don't know how anything will affect anyone. And, I guess in a couple of weeks, if, things don't come to a sudden halt, we will know more. But for now, let's just focus a little bit on the footballing prospects. Schalke, of course, are not in the greatest shape going into this game before the break. I don't know whether they have the potential to drastically improve. How do you think David Wagner's team will set up in this game, and how do you think their strategy will look like?
Well, Schalke do get some injured players back, not all of them, but I mean, it's difficult to say. All of these sporting questions are, anyone's good guess. I mean, I think we have a somewhat solid understanding of Dortmund just because, we watch them all the time. We kind of understand the thinking or the thought processes of a guy like Favre, but, I can't, with all honesty, say that I study David Wagner at Schalke enough to, to give an honest assessment after 9 weeks of not, being able to see them even once. I mean, I think we talked about last week a little bit, or maybe that was somewhere else. But I mean, Schalke have only scored like 3 goals in the 7 or so games before the coronavirus break.
4 in 2020 and none on the road.
Yeah, so I mean, there's that. Obviously, they have some problems in creating chances. I would safely deduce from that, I would say.
Well, apparently, I just read on the infogol.net preview also says that they have like the second worst XG conversion rate in the Bundesliga. So maybe it's not just creating chances, but also lackluster finishing. But I mean, if you only score 4 goals in a time frame where Erling Haaland scores 9, you probably do have some problems with your goal scoring as a whole team and chance creation.
I think Burgstaller, he really wants people to know it's not Guido, it's Guido. I'm not sure he knows about the connotation in American English.
Are you saying he has not watched Jersey Shore?
Yeah, or any Marb movies or whatever. He doesn't have a Bundesliga goal this season, if I'm not mistaken. Rabbi Matondo maybe has 1. Benito Raman, he has like 4 or something. So they don't have a striker that strikes fear in Dortmund's hearts from the get-go. But I mean, whatever we say in front of or ahead of Revierderbys has kind of fallen flat on our faces in the last few years, because Schalke, as opposed to Dortmund, seem to find another gear in Revierderbys, especially when they're on paper the worst team.
I would actually like counter that a little bit, because I do think that Dortmund find another gear in the Revierderby as well. Just the
second reverse?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Schalke seem to thrive on being the underdog in the Revierderby, whereas Dortmund seem to have problems with being the favorite. So in a twisted sense, it might actually be, in that case, a positive for Dortmund that there's no a crowd in the stadium, in that sense that Schalke can't feed off the negative emotion of the Dortmund people and feed off that kind of extra motivation, which is something Bayern often talk about. Someone like Oliver Kahn always said that there's no better feeling than going into the stadium and everybody hates you. I mean, that there seem to be clubs and players, but Schalke as a team, I mean, it doesn't really matter. It seems like, anyway, over the last few years anyway. Doesn't really matter who's on the pitch for them. The team as a whole seems to get better in Revierderbys against Dortmund, when Dortmund on paper are quite obviously the better side, which is still the case here, even though obviously the playing field might be a bit leveled and Dortmund aren't in full capacity in terms of personnel.
Yeah, I mean, I assume this will have a bit of a preseason friendly feeling, just in terms of unforced errors. So this is also why I predict a more high-scoring game than usual, because I think that these errors can be taken advantage of, but maybe I'm completely wrong, and all these errors happen in the final third and in the build-up, and the lack of precision is then Dortmund's downfall or Schalke's downfall or whatever. But yeah, we have a question from M_BVB1909. and he or she asks, who does the enforced break favor more, BVB or the Smurfs?
It's clearly Schalke, because they were in a relatively poor or torrid run of form in 2020. I mean, you earlier referenced the two teams being only 1 point apart at the point of the first Revierderby of the season. They actually were 1 point apart at the halfway point of the season. So the difference Dortmund have made up in the 8 games of the second half of the season, and not, the 16 or 17 since the first Revierderby. So that kind of shows you both that Dortmund were in a good run of form, but also Schalke were in a bad run of form. We've mentioned their problems in front of the opponent's goal previously. So for them, the break, there was no run to break, really. I mean, for them, not continuing on a bad run of form with a lot of players missing was probably a godsend in some ways, but obviously you also had the financial issues at Schalke, which, seemed to be much more dramatic than anyone predicted. So if the players kind of got wind of that and took note of it, because there was not much else for them to do, obviously, when everybody was staying home. I think you probably followed the news around your club, even if you're typically not necessarily too involved in that. Maybe that has kind of a psychological effect, but overall I think we mentioned last week that Dortmund were maybe the worst off in terms of the Ghostgames and being the only unbeaten team in Germany in front of their home fans and not having them for the 2 biggest games of the season. And the same can now be said in reverse for Schalke, who might actually be among all 18 Bundesliga clubs one of those who profited the most from this break.
Yeah, again, it's only speculation, but it's going to be interesting also with the perspective that the last derby in Dortmund, the infamous 4-2 loss, was, I guess, the one and only home loss for Lucien Favre, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, if we look at the Bundesliga table right now, Dortmund are 4 points off Bayern, and Schalke are, I think, 10 or 12 points off the top 5. And so for Schalke, it really is, mostly about the Europa League spot. But, from a more cynical perspective, I would say that this is going to be Schalke's biggest game of the season now, just because their remaining schedule isn't all that interesting, and also because basically they can ruin Dortmund's season, and that's pretty much all they can do at this point. I don't know how vital it is for them to qualify for the Europa League, because I don't know if there will be one anytime soon, and I also don't know whether the couple of extra millions will really help them out in a big way or not, if they should get them, so I think for Schalke this is another big opportunity to rain on Dortmund's parade. Meanwhile, Dortmund really will have to try and get the groove going, because as you said on the last show, I think if Dortmund want to win the championship, they at least have to win 8 of the last remaining 9 games. So this is going to be a big game for Schalke, and obviously also for Dortmund, just in the sense that it's a Revierderby. But I think Schalke have a little bit more negative motivation, if you know what I mean. So I'm not looking forward to that. But I think we should shift gears a little bit and talk about something that might be or might have a bit more of a positive impact. And the talk of Erling Haaland was obviously relatively huge, and his impact was immediately felt when he joined Dortmund. But he's the type of striker where I'm especially looking forward to seeing him in the high-profile games for Dortmund, which obviously are Schalke and Bayern. And I do think he is the type of player that strikes fears into the hearts of Schalke players and fans. How do you foresee his impact? Because I don't think he is a player that will be faced too much by the interruption.
No, I completely agree. I can basically picture him punching frozen pork in Rocky style at home, or doing 3,000 push-ups for the hell of it. I mean, he seems a bit like a maniac in a positive sense, in a football positive sense. So I could definitely see him coming out of the break without any kind of loss of performance or whatever. He doesn't strike me as someone, as you said, that's faced by kind of pressure of a Revierderby and the likes. I mean, his scoring record in the Champions League this season for Salzburg and Dortmund was outstanding. He seems to embrace, the pressures of high-profile games, as you said. So, with his own profile in terms of strengths and weaknesses, I think he's not really the kind of striker you want to face in your first game back either. Because he's quite big, very good technically, but also just lightning fast, which, some people may not remember watching these games, but I mean, you saw this lanky white dude who basically, when he's in full pelt, probably could hang a little bit with Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. So he's, as I said, not the kind of striker I want to face after 9 weeks without any kind of match practice as a defender. So that certainly seems like an avenue potentially for success for Dortmund.
Yeah, I mean, he scored 9 goals alone in the Bundesliga in just a brief amount of games. It's quite amazing how well he performed. And I mean, his start was ginormous, and he regressed a little bit to the mean in the end, but not by much, I want to say. So he's still a very forceful weapon, and I think that is something that Dortmund will definitely need, not only because the obvious scoring output, but because of his mentality on the field. I think that plays a big role, and someone that's very much up for the fight, even if he's only 19 years old. I think, as we briefly, hinted at, Dortmund stuck in reverse gear in Revierderbys. I think it's not illegal to mention that Dortmund shat their pants a couple of times in Revierderbys completely needlessly. I think the 4-2 loss last season was one of the most epic BVB implosions I've witnessed. So I really hope that his tenacity can really help the rest of the team. And I think when I look at Thomas Delaney in midfield, he will probably have a similar swagger going. So I'm not as worried right now about Dortmund shitting the bed as other times for some reason. I think Erling Haaland makes a big difference there. But someone who is out for this game is Marco Reus, and Marco Reus, I think in recent derbies hasn't performed at his very best. I mean, he was sent off in that infamous 4-2 loss, but otherwise I think his derby performances have been not up to the standard that you would expect Marco Reus to perform on. That being said, sadly he is out now. He is a team captain. He's a very important part of this team, but Dortmund have managed to make do without him for a couple of games now. I think since he was out since February. And Torgen Hazard, I think, has done quite a good job, and Julian Brandt as well. But now with Julian Brandt probably being dropped a little bit further back into the number 8 slot, how do you think Dortmund will compensate that loss, and who do you think will play at the number 10 position now? And do you think that Gio Reyna will start?
Basically, I'm expecting there not to be a number 10. I think it's going to be Brandt and Delaney in the center, and then Sancho and Hazard flanking Haaland. So, unless my maths are off.
No, you're right. You're right. I don't know why I was stuck in that 4-2-3-1 system, but you're obviously completely right. Dortmund play with the back 3, and there is no number 10. So yes, correct. Sorry for napping here. I think this will be the lineup with Hazard and Sancho on the side.
I mean, there is somewhat interestingly a lot of the midweek preview publications, whatever you want to call them, had Azar not starting. I think he also recently had another child. I don't think it was their first one. So he might have missed some time, but he's definitely in quasi-quarantine with the rest of the team, unlike Witsel and Can. So he's definitely available, but there seemed to be, let's put it that way. I think recently, previews have included him, but, on like Tuesday or Wednesday morning, I think a couple of publications actually had Götze starting, which, I don't really see how that would make sense, why they suddenly would turn to Götze. I think if for some reason one of the three attacking players was unable to go, I think the nod would probably go to Gio Reyna, just because Favre is obviously quite smitten with him, with good reason, because he's so unfazed with everything and just so much potential and quality on the ball and whatnot. And you would think that this special derby atmosphere or lack thereof might actually be conducive to throwing in a young guy like that, because you would probably be a bit hesitant to give Reyna the reins in, starting 11 of a Bundesliga derby with 80,000 people in the stands and huge pressure. But with no fans available and, no sounds or very little sound or whatever, I'm not sure what Dortmund are going to do in terms of Nobby Dickel making announcements to no one in particular.
I think it's just going to be awkward enough that I can just see this happening, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, Nobby Dickel is always a bit awkward. So, I mean, that might be an argument to be made there, that a start for Reyna would probably make more sense than in any other Revierderby, but I don't really see them going away from what has worked quite well with Azar and Sancho flanking Haaland.
Yeah, I agree, especially when you have that many substitution possibilities. And I think we can briefly talk about this because I myself, I'm a little bit overwhelmed by the possibility of having 5 substitutions. So how do you think Favre, or in general, how do you think it should be utilized? Who do you see, playing Dominic Santor as at Santor95 on Twitter? Any chance Raschel or Balerdi gets subbed on late in midfield?
Balerdi being subbed on in midfield would be weird, as he's a defender. I wouldn't be shocked to see Raschel, just because, the lack of personnel options. I mean, he should be on the bench with all the guys that are out. I mean, we've mentioned all but Nico Schulz, who's also unavailable due to injury. So, I mean, you have 5, if I'm not mistaken, players, Zagadou, Witsel, Can, Reus, and Schulz, who would be in the matchday squad, who are not going to be there, and they don't have many more senior players available that could take the place of Raschel, so he might be on the bench. And I mean, let's assume he uses all 5 subs. Who are those going to be? I mean, Reyna, Dahoud, Götze, blank. Probably a defender in there, so Balerdi would make sense, and then you are probably looking at Raschel, or I don't even know who else would be available at this point. Moret, perhaps, if you want to bring on a winger. So I wouldn't look at it as much in terms of personnel, because that's obviously going to fluctuate over the next few weeks. They don't expect Can and Witsel to be out for long, I think, and Reus expects to be back for the Bayern game, perhaps, even though he obviously shouldn't rush himself too much. But, aside from personnel, I would assume that you're basically going to, or that Favre is going to make the same kind of subs that he usually makes. But, when you previously chose which winger to replace, to bring on fresh legs, now you just replace both of them. If you decided between bringing on an attacking player and solidifying midfield with Delaney, who's now going to be available as a substitute as opposed to Dahoud previously, then now you can bring on Reyna and Delaney. So I don't think it's going to necessarily make the thought processes too different, but there are just more options available, and I think the smart thing to do would be to go for the freshest legs on the field at all times. And obviously that's kind of an exciting prospect when you have a lot of exciting attacking talent in your team as Dortmund have. So let's get ready for more Reina and maybe even, a little bit of Götze sprinkled in, which would be nice because it's 9 games and see you later.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even know if we've discussed it yet, but Mario Götze has obviously announced that he will leave Dortmund at the end of the season. Any comment on that?
I'm actually not sure he has announced anything, but he doesn't need to because it's quite obvious and everybody's reporting it. So he's changed agents. He's now being represented by the same person who represents Emre Can, for example, and he... Reza Fazeli is the agent's name, and he, according to reports, is letting his contacts do the magic in Spain and Italy mostly, but due to coronavirus and those 2 countries being hit quite hard by it, there's always, I guess, the chance of also going to England, which has also been kind of hit quite hard by coronavirus. So it's definitely an unfortunate situation to be a high-priced free agent in the summer. I mean, Götze's wage demands are one of the main reasons why he's not getting another contract at Dortmund, and he's not going to get that kind of contract anywhere in the world right now. That's completely unfeasible. So he has to kind of make a decision that's aside from monetary reasons first. I think he should go somewhere, and I hope he goes somewhere where he can just be a happy football player. If that's Italy fighting for a Champions League spot instead of fighting for winning the Champions League with an English club, then just go ahead and do that. I mean, you have nothing left to prove. You are going to be a father, I think, later this year. Just go be happy, man.
All right. I completely sign that. One last question about the substitutions. It's a bit more tongue-in-cheek. Who do you think will be the first coach who, after like 30 minutes or so, pulls the trigger and subs 5 field players out all at once? Who's going to be that tantrum guy?
That's a good question.
I know.
I really hope we see at least the quadruple substitution. If it's match day 34 and that's 2 teams that have nothing left to play for, I just hope someone gives us that picture of 4 guys being subbed on at the same time, because it would look ridiculous. But let's say Bruno Labbadia for Hertha on the final match day of the season.
You know what? I totally forgot that Bruno Labbadia is now the Hertha coach. Has it been?
And Heiko Herrlich, the Augsburg coach.
Oh.
There's 2 coaches who've been appointed for weeks who are now finally going to have their first match.
Yeah, see, so basically they had a little bit of preseason. But let's discuss Hertha on another day. If I'm not mistaken, Dortmund still play them this year,
Yep.
right? So
Yeah.
So there's plenty of time to discuss this wreckfest. I think we are almost done here. We only have predictions left and one announcement. Lars, who will win the derby and by what scoreline?
Well, first, let me preface this by saying or relaying that there's kind of 2 schools of thought with these Ghost games coming up. I think it was Freddy Bobic, former Dortmund striker, not a very successful one at that, who predicted that there's going to be goal fests galore and a number of 5-5 games or whatever. That was a few weeks ago, and then today I think Julian Nagelsmann, Leipzig coach, actually said he expects teams to sit back much more than usually, try to defend because that's easier than attack and be creative, and he expects a lot more goalless draws.
Nagelsmann's school of thought is probably that you can't be abused by the home crowd if you just sit back and pass it around, right?
That might be a thought that you have to at least have with your coaching staff, but I think it's probably going to oscillate between those extremes. I don't necessarily expect a couple of 5-5 games. I'm not sure we've had a 5-5 game in the Bundesliga ever. So for this Revierderby, I will tell you honestly, I have no feeling whatsoever what's going to happen. I mean, neither positive from a Dortmund perspective nor negative. I have no clue what to expect, but when you don't have a clue, I think I'm almost duty bound on this show to go with the housewife tip of a 2-1 home win.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I will go down a different route, and I will take the school of thought from Friede Bobic and the school of thought from Julian Nagelsmann, and I'm just going to predict a 5-0 win for Dortmund. See, there you go. Just that easy. I think my logic is here.
Quick maths.
Yeah, it's completely flawless logic applied here. So, but yeah, as I just teased, we have one announcement to make, and that is the Yellowwallpod has a giveaway. We do have a T-shirt from Marco Reus, the good old Marco Reus and his label back in the day. I think it's from 2015, if I'm not mistaken, and it's one of his 3 monkeys. I think it's the one that's holding his mouth, it's also signed by the player, and all you will have to do is, once we tweet that picture out of the winnable T-shirt, is follow us and retweet it, and that's it. So good luck everyone out there. We'll I think ship it all around the world, unless the US Postal Service gets completely dismantled in the meantime. As always, thank you for being on here, Lars, and providing your expertise in the wake, or not in the wake, but in the absence of Matthias and Konstantin, who just left us completely hanging ahead of this all-important Revierderby. Maybe one last personal question. Are you looking forward to this game at all, or are you a bit torn?
I expect it to be torn, but but honestly, I'm kind of fine right now, at least with the prospect of getting to watch live sports. I mean, maybe it's going to be super weird at like 3:35 on Saturday German time, because there's no crowd noise. The game is super slow or whatever, but I haven't watched any of the K-League games without supporters. I think that's the only fix of live sports you could have in the last few weeks, unless you had weird connections and were able to watch the Belarusian or Costa Rican Cup or whatever. I think there were a couple of games that some degenerates were probably able to watch, but for me, this is going to be the first taste of live sports since March 11th. I think that was the Dortmund game at PSG. So there were a couple of Europa League games the Thursday, but I didn't watch any of that. So it's been a while, and watching sports is some of my favorite thing to do. I mean, it's obviously also kind of my job. And it makes my job easier to have games and not report on people talking about when games might restart. So from all those aspects, I'm kind of looking forward to it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not going to be my cup of tea.
Yeah, I'm not on a 10 out of 10 yet on the excitement level, but I can sense a little bit of excitement within me, but that can also very quickly fade away. So not holding my breath on the all-in-all success of the restart of the Bundesliga in this mode. I think Konstantin said on the last episode what Ultras think about the entire restart, and if you want to hear what he said, just listen back to that episode. Meanwhile, for us, it's now time to get out of here. Lars, again, thanks for being on here. Please tell our listeners how to get in touch with you.
Just follow me on Twitter at Lars Pollmann.
Very well, and you can follow me at Stefan Butzko on Twitter. If you want to follow all of us, do that on Twitter and Facebook at Yellowwallpod for our written content. Please check theyellowwall.net, and if you want to sponsor an episode for $10 a pop, or just become a regular patron, go to patreon.com/theyellowwall, and we are all hopeful that Dortmund can pull out 3 points somehow. And with that, thank you all for listening, and goodbye.